All right, let's of course get into this story because any moment from now, the Minister of Electricity, Dr Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, is expected to brief the media on the ministerial determination for the procurement of 2,500 megawatts of new generation capacity from nuclear. Yesterday, the Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, announced that Cabinet has considered and approved the publication of the updated Integrated Resource Plan 2023 for public comments and consultation. The document reviews the previously approved IRP 2019 and is considered to have significant key changes, including the electricity demand projection, Eskom's energy availability factor, and Eskom's revised coal-fired power plant shutdown plans, as well as the cost of the new power generation technology. I know it's a lot for us to comprehend at this point, but to talk to us more about this and the country's energy plans going forward, we're joined in studio by Clyde Mallinson. He, of course, is an independent energy analyst. Clyde, it's always such a pleasure to have you here in studio, and thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good to be here.
So yesterday we, of course, saw the Minister in the Presidency talking about and announcing that the Cabinet has considered and approved the publication of the Integrated Resource Plan 2023 for comments and consultations. Obviously, this is long overdue. Perhaps you want to talk about this.
Yeah, the first thing to mention is that we're meant to have an integrated energy plan, which encompasses electricity and fuels, diesel, petrol, it's the energy. So in the country, electricity only makes up about 25% of our energy. The rest comes from pretty much from diesel and fuel and coal for industrial purposes. So we tend to fixate on electricity, whereas the energy situation is broader than that. Now, we've been waiting for an integrated energy plan forever. Still hasn't been published. And the Integrated Resource Plan, strangely named actually, deals only with electricity. And it's a subset, if you like, of an integrated energy plan. Now, it's meant to be published every 2 years. It's meant to be a guideline, a living guideline that is able to adapt to changing circumstances. Well, the first one was 2010, the next one 2019, and now 2023. So we're on to our third iteration when we should be at least on our sixth or seventh iteration. So that's always been disturbing, but what's more disturbing is it's treated as if it's the Bible, as it were. It's a rule book. Yeah. It's a straitjacket. Often you can't do something if it's not in the Integrated Resource Plan. Now that's very different from its intention, where it's meant to be a guideline as to the energy mix into the future. And unfortunately, it's become almost a straitjacket of what we are and aren't allowed to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think you've answered my next question as to why it's so significant, this integrated energy plan. Because, I mean, we look at the country's energy availability and we see the state that we're in right now. So one would think this would be treated as it should be, like you say, updated regularly, something that should be top of mind, top of the agenda. This is very significant.
It is. And in fact, just to give you an example, in the 2019 plan, the underlying assumption, apart from projections of energy demand, was that the energy availability factor of Eskom would be 75%. That was the underlying assumption. And everything else was added onto that to give us energy sufficiency. Well, this year to date, we're running at about 54%. As opposed to, if we were running at 75%, we would have a glut of electricity.
Yeah.
So the whole plan was premised on the wrong assumption about the availability factor at Eskom. And you can imagine, if you base your whole plan on the wrong assumption, it's not a very good plan. In fact, it would almost be better to not have a plan than to have a plan that was premised on the wrong assumptions.
I want to ask your opinion on whether you were surprised or not that Cabinet actually went ahead and approved the IRP before it was actually put out and published for public comments and consultations.
It seems to me to be back to front. I would have thought that public comments and consultations would help craft the plan into a more robust document, which could then be taken to Cabinet and gazetted. I'm not one to say what the correct way around is, but that's the way I would imagine. It's almost as if the comments now are post facto. Well, you can comment now, but kind of the plan's pretty much
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you say. The plan is that,
we'll
tick it generally works the way you expect it to work, but it seems to be backwards at the moment. But, I mean, if we look at it, so according to this integrated resource plan for 2019 publication, it was expected that post-2030, as aligned with the National Development Plan, there would be a decommissioning of the aging coal power stations, so that the coal-fired power plants. Yesterday, Cabinet announced that the revised shutting down of existing coal-fired power stations will now be done post-2035. So that's a big change. Is government on track in dealing with coal power stations? What's going on there?
Well, coal power stations have a nominal shutdown date just based on age and efficiency and, in fact, environmental conditions. So many of our old coal power stations are due for decommissioning, not because of climate change, not because of anything other than they've reached end of life. Now, you can, of course, keep old equipment running for eternity if you wanted to. By the time it's running in 2060 or something, it would essentially be a brand new plant made up of spare parts but you can see that's an expensive exercise. And one of the very disturbing things is that a lot of the old coal plants are very heavy emitters of sulfur dioxide, noxic nitrous oxide, nasty things that are detrimental to human health. So just putting aside the CO2 for the moment, those plants are all in violation of their minimum emission standards, and they all need to be retrofitted with equipment that would clean up the exhaust emissions, as it were. And that retrofitting is going to cost about 300 billion. So there's a reluctance. If you've got an old car, do you really want to put a catalytic converter on the back when you know that the engine's about to pack up? So I'm not anti. If the coal fleet old units are running well and we can prolong the shutdown for maybe a year or two to give us time to put in replacements, that's fine. But to talk about extending their life way beyond when they're not going to be economically viable doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are looking at that and wondering, what makes sense here. But in terms of energy and availability, I mean, this past Sunday, the Minister of Electricity, Dr. Ramokgopa, said Eskom is still within budget in its diesel usage, and that the power utility is conscious, very, very conscious in terms of its gas turbine to keep the diesel spending within the 30 billion allocated amount and budget. I mean, what are your opinions on this matter?
Well, let's just say if you've got a budget for 12 months, the first thing I would do, although I'm not very good at budgeting, I'll make that confession up front, is kind of divide by 12 and say I've got about 2.5 billion a month, so I'm going to work with that. Well, Eskom have pretty much blown their budget with 3 months to go. If they carried on in December the way they did in November, the budget would be gone by the end of December. And then the cupboard's bare. It's kind of like that Provita advert where at the end of the month you're just eating the box. Never mind the Provitas without any cheese on. And they've blown their budget. So I track these things very closely. Do you know that in December to date, the diesel usage has literally been stopped, certainly at the independent power producer diesel producers. It's just been shut off. So it's a case now, yes, we're going to keep within our budget, but we spent too much of our budget in the first 9 months, so now we're going to just have nothing. And I remember last year when we got in that position, guess what happens if you're a student and you've spent your budget you get from your parents? You go and ask for more. You say, man, I didn't quite expect this and I didn't plan that. So there will be a request for more, I suspect.
Different conversation, but the same thing.
Yes.
Do you think a CEO is going to help here? Do you honestly think the appointment of the new CEO, Dan Morekane, is going to provide an opportunity to accelerate all these plans and try and fix up the situation?
No, look, I think it's very important to have a CEO of Eskom, to have an acting CEO. And it's almost as if Minister Ramokgopa has been the sort of acting CEO in a way, because he's taken on the role of doing things that should actually be done by Eskom, not by a minister. But it's great, he's very enthusiastic, he's helped. But, whoever well, it's Dan Morgani, who's the new CEO now. The key thing with him is he needs an anti-nuptial agreement with the powers that be. He needs to sit down and say, if I'm going to be the CEO, I need this department online. I need to declare where my swimming lanes are. Can I move out of this lane or stay? He really, really needs that support. And anyone who took on that role would have needed that support, because it's a thankless task, and putting the right person in there can have an influence. But that person has to be a leader. And their first job is to say, these are my ground rules. I'm taking this job on my terms, not on your terms. And if that doesn't happen, it'll just be another sad luck story in 6 months or 12 months' time.
Alarm bells are going off in my head from just you saying, I'm going in on my terms. Because when you have so many ministries that you're answerable, in this particular entity, how you perform your job independently is almost an impossibility. That's just me thinking out loud. I don't know if you feel the same way.
My father used to be a magician, ventriloquist, puppeteer.
Yeah.
And when you do marionettes, you have the puppets dancing to your fingers. And the person who's coming into Eskom now, the first job is to take a pair of scissors and cut off all those strings so that the puppet becomes its own master.
Imagine. Wow. Oh, well, let's see if that happens. Let's see if it happens. But from past experience, it looks like that's never the case. And that's a big problem. We are running into time constraints because, as you know, very shortly we're going to have the minister, actually Dr. Ramokgopa is going to be briefing the media about the ministerial determination for the procurement of 2,500 megawatts of new generation capacity from nuclear. I want to ask, is this a positive development for the country? Because as soon as you say the word nuclear, people are like, not nuclear. But talk to us from a professional point of view. Can this be
from my professional opinion, nuclear is the technology of the past. It has no role to play in our future. It's going to be, I've used the expression before, it's going to be like a retired 15s rugby prop on the bench of a 7s team. It's a different game we're moving into the future. We're going through an energy disruption. And the notion, we need 80 gigawatts of solar, 50 gigawatts of wind, 30 gigawatts of storage, and then you've got 2.5 gigawatts of nuclear. And when the nuclear gets refueled, which it has to do, what's going to cover for it? Well, it's going to be covered by wind and solar and storage while it's refueled. So if it's covered for 5 weeks, it could be covered for 10 weeks. If it's covered for 10 weeks, it could be covered for eternity. So it's going to be, they talk about it being a no-regret decision. I presented at the NERSA hearings and I called it known regrets rather than no regrets. Wow. And in fact, I made reference to Edith Piaf, if I remember correctly, who sings that fabulous song, No Regret.
Well, hopefully we're not going to be playing that song, because in a very short while, that briefing is going to happen, and this is quite a bitter pill to swallow ahead of what we're about to hear. But Clyde, it is always an absolute pleasure speaking to you and just getting your views on this. So that is about to begin in a couple of minutes' time, but we need to quickly pay some bills before we do that. Clyde Mallinson, thank you. Thank you so much for talking to us. Independent energy analyst talking to us about Cabinet's decision to approve the revised Integrated Resources Plan 2023. That is yet to be gazetted for public comment, but also, of course, in just a couple of minutes' time, we're going to be hearing about this 2,500 megawatts of new generation capacity from nuclear.